Yeah, thanks. The first few months since we launched Cerbos Hub, actually at KubeCon last year, the growth has been great to see. We've onboarded a number of users from our open source project to our fully managed control plane and getting all the benefits of a much more streamlined managed CI deployment pipeline, as well as really leveraging our new embedded policy decision point powered by WebAssembly. I think it's fair to say WebAssembly and WASM has kind of taken the world by storm probably in the last year or so, particularly now with this unification around the WASM component model, where we see kind of Kubernetes and particularly like the cloud native space going is a much more of this encapsulation of common functionality. These really nice WASM components, which define a very clean interface of exactly how you interact and join and compile applications together, is really kind of this new model of how we kind of foresee application architectures going. And Kubernetes is really well placed to kind of leverage this with the idea of a Kubernetes component is now just another type of pod inside of your cluster. You can very easily start combining and mixing and basically architecting components in a way that basically forms whatever use case you need to deliver upon. Yeah, so obviously WASM is kind of a new approach to kind of development, though if you've been around long enough and used to like the days of COM and ActiveX and kind of the old JVM runtime type approaches, there is definitely some echoes of yesteryear of how applications are built. Yeah, Kubernetes is kind of well placed to kind of be the orchestration layer even of these WASM components, but from an organizational perspective, it is a bit of a mind shift in terms of how you kind of build and compartmentalize components. Because if you think of a container, it's just the runtime, it's the binary, it's built for a particular architecture. But when you start looking more at the WASM space, not only are you now defining the actual execution, which is the WASM kind of itself, but also defines the interface and the architecture that needs to be provided to that component to run. So your WIT, as it's called, basically defines that this service or this component needs to be provided a key value store or a database or those kind of things. And with Cerbos, we're kind of really leveraging that and making sure Cerbos is kind of the best implementation for how you do authorization in this whole ecosystem. Yeah, absolutely. So with Cerbos Hub, as well as launching the managed control plane, we also introduced the new embeddable policy decision point. So classically, Cerbos kind of works as a container or a binary that you're running on your backend, either in your Kubernetes cluster or just kind of bare metal on a VM somewhere. But we got these kind of more and more use cases coming to us from our users saying like, I want to be able to do authorization at the edge or even on the client devices for those kind of more presentational kind of use cases. So when we kind of looked at sort of how to best solve this, in these environments, you can't necessarily run a whole container or a binary. So we needed a much more smaller footprint way and a much more light way of running the Cerbos decision point logic at the edge or even on devices, and WASM really was the natural approach to that. So as part of Cerbos Hub, as well as generating the artifact that gets deployed to your backend Cerbos instances, we also generate the WebAssembly version, which is an embeddable version of our policy decision point, which they can be pulled directly into your edge runtimes or even into the client devices. So you get the exact same interface in terms of, can this user do this action, this resource that the Cerbos system provides, but it's the same set of policies that you're defining are now being deployed both to your backend, to your Kubernetes cluster, for example, also can be then pulled down into your edge functions or onto actual client devices. So it's a fairly unique approach that really allows you to do authorization anywhere in your architecture stack. Yeah, certainly. So the core of the Cerbos embeddable policy decision point is the engine. And then what we're doing now is putting adapters and basically runtimes around the core engine to allow you to spin it up in an environment that exposes a standard component model. If you look at things like SpinCube, which got announced last week, WASM Cloud being the CNCF project, these kind of implement the WebAssembly component model, the component spec. So we're now updating the Cerbos embeddable policy decision point to basically implement that spec. So you can very easily spin it up in a WASM Cloud infrastructure or using SpinCube to run directly in Kubernetes. And you get, again, that exact same API in terms of how you interact and check authorization permissions. Yeah, absolutely. So we are big adopters of kind of cloud native technologies here at Cerbos, not just how we build Cerbos, but also how we run Cerbos Hub itself. So Cerbos Hub, unsurprisingly, runs inside of a Kubernetes cluster. We're leveraging a number of the CNCF projects. So for example, all our interfaces are gRPC. We're doing the whole OpenTelemetry stack. So your Cerbos decision points, for example, are running inside of your cluster and they expose OTel traces, logging, Prometheus metrics, all the stuff you're kind of used to. So as well as leveraging those technologies, we're also trying to contribute back. So we're part of some new standards around authorization with the AuthZen project. And in terms of giving users the easiest way to get up and running with Cerbos in their environments, we publish things like Helm charts to get you up and running to make without having to necessarily jump through too many hoops and creating too many manifests. And then the WASM piece, as I mentioned, is kind of is starting to adopt this component model. So as our clusters out there start adopting these runtimes that support WASM, you'll be able to drop the embeddable version of the Cerbos policy decision point directly into those environments.